my fellow wizards, the summer 2024 test realm is here and there is a bunch of stuff to talk about. I know I definitely have some strong feelings about this update, so let's get into things. Obviously, there will be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned, and since this is test realm, everything shown here is subject to change. Let's begin with the biggest part of this update, the new Cabal's Revenge raid. This is the third raid KI has released, and it is for level 170 wizards. The basic premise is that the Cabal has gathered at an abandoned Polaris fort to face you with two different raid bosses at the top of the fort. And it looks like this raid is considerably easier than previous raids, with the Kittens Guild beating the raid just a few hours after test realm released, so the devs may buff the raid to be more difficult when it comes to live. It's definitely an improvement over the 3 months it took for the last raid to be officially beaten, anyway. The raid gear itself has a pretty unique appearance. To me, it looks like if Mercy and the Shard Warrior set had a baby, but you know, to each their own. Let me know which of the raid sets looks best so far to you guys in the comments, but I am currently voting for the Crying Sky raid set. This is just a little too out there for me. Moving on to the stats, for PvE players, Polaris raid gear is essentially a small upgrade to Nullity gear with the same stat template, but just like upgrading from Eon to Reaver, the small stat bump you get may not be worth the time investment of raiding for many players. It's just a huge time and resource investment for very little gain, unfortunately. For those of you that do raid, I'd love to hear if you personally will be farming for this gear or not. While I have not personally had the chance to do the raid yet, the general consensus seems to be that the raid itself is a lot of fun, it's just that the gear drops may not be worth the grind, so it'll be interesting to see what tweaks, if any, the devs make when the raid goes live. Moving on, there are now 5 new lore spells with spell elements added to the Takanobu the Masterless in the Cave of Solitude in Mushu and Lambent Fire in the Crystal Caves in Avalon Gold Key Bosses. And if you want to know more about general strategies and drops for these guys, you can check out my other video on the topic. Takanobu is getting 3 new spells, including the fire spell Apocalypse, which deals 350 fire damage and detonates 2 damage over times. The ice spell Ice Elemental, which deals 330 ice damage and adds a negative 30% universal weakness, and the death spell Monk of Mourning, which deals 470 death damage and adds a 50% universal shield. Lambent Fire, on the other hand, is getting the myth spell Reconneton, which removes 3 positive wards, then deals 395 myth damage, and the balance spell Brave Sir Badger, which deals 390 balance damage and gives a 25% universal damage aura for 4 rounds. These spells are also going to be available as spellement drops from the new updated Ninjas and Knights spelemental packs, so you have multiple options to get them. Design-wise, I think my personal favorite of the group has to be the Brave Sir Badger, because he just looks so cute and derpy, but let me know which ones you guys like best. It does look like Life and Storm have been left out this time since we're the only ones who didn't get any new lore spells. Feels like discrimination to me. But in all seriousness, it does look like the devs were just trying to round out the spells for each of these bosses so every school now has one, but I'm still a bit salty that my Storm didn't get a new spell. Overall, the spells are definitely a fun addition, however I do think, as with many of the other lore spells, they only have a very niche use in PvE and are mostly going to be helpful for PvP and advanced content players instead, which is a bummer for the average PvE player. In addition to the added lore spells, there are also new level 170 gear sets for all 7 schools, dropping from both the Takanobu the Masterless and Lambent Fire Gold Key bosses. They both also drop new reagents, which can be used to craft the gear at a nearby NPC vendor outside their sigils as a pity system. The Lambent gear looks visually similar to the Knight's Spelemental Pack gear and uses Spectral Shard reagents, while the Takanobu gear looks visually similar to the Ninja's Spelemental Pack gear and uses Sword Oil reagents. The packs themselves have also been updated to have the new level 170 gear available as drops too. According to the devs, the level brackets between the old max level 140 gear from the packs and the new max 170 gear have also been added, so you can get levels 150 and 160 gear too. So what are the stats like? It looks like compared to other popular 170 sets like Reaver or Wastelander, you are losing resist and a bit of damage, but gaining some pierce and shadow rating. This gear appears to really be aimed toward PvPers who want a shadow template set without having to raid. The Athame is similar to the Reaver Athame, but has different jewels with a triangle versus square slot, while the ring gives up damage for crit and is generally not going to be worth it for most people. The amulet is pretty similar to the Wastelander amulet, so nothing too crazy there, and then the deck is probably the best piece to get as it gives up health for crit, pip conserve, block, and Archmastery, and has a circle slot for jewels like Pierce. Both new sets have identical stats at each boss, but different item cards, which are the different pig spells versus the king art spells. This change to older key bosses does seem like a good way to breathe life back into older dungeons and give people incentive to farm for gear besides just for stitching, which was the case before, and it makes people want to buy old packs again, which is obviously a monetary gain for KI. However, it does look like most of the new year is going to primarily appeal to advanced combat and PvP builds rather than PvE, and its main purpose is just to give them a way to get the Shadow Template gear without having to raid. I do think some of the lore spells and gear might appeal to PvE players too, but it does look like these gold key bosses have been overhauled primarily for hardcore players. Speaking of boss changes, let's look at our next update where Arc 2 boss rematches have been added, with rematches including Mithraea, Sneatsnee, Pendragon, Hawk Cries Blood, and Morganth. It also looks like KI has tweaked the ingredients needed to craft these rematches. Lord Nightshade, for instance, requires the newer Flax reagent, and Pendragon uses the Rose reagent. Both these reagents have been added to overworld spawns in Wizard City and Avalon for an easier time getting them, which is nice. Many harvested reagents also now have a much lower cooldown, so you can collect them faster without as much downtime with a new respawn rate of 5 seconds, which should make gathering them to craft the rematches a bit easier. Rematch recipes can still be gotten at Raquel in the arena, but are now also available at each world's housing vendor. And while they used to only be available in challenge mode, now you can choose between standard and challenge mode at the rematch sigil for different difficulty levels. Both standard and challenge mode rematches are based on the highest level of the arc, so Wizard City through Dragonspire is all level 50, and Celestia through Chrysalis is all level 100. Higher level players are not penalized for participating in lower level dungeons, but are automatically scaled down with lower stats and access to only level appropriate spells, so prepare accordingly. As an added reward, you will receive a gold key for your first victory on any of these challenge mode rematch fights, and boss rematches are also given as badge rewards after completing a full arc of worlds. Previously, we've only received gold keys as badge rewards, so this is an interesting change. Finally, level 170 versions of gear available in Arc 1 rematches have been added to Arc 2 rematches as well. Obviously, it's nice to see more rematches added, and the reagent spawn rate buff is a welcome change, but again, this update focuses most on hardcore players since most average players don't really bother with boss rematches, so I'll be interested to see what percentage of the player base interacts with these newer fights. Up next, we have a straight quality of life update with the introduction of an emote wheel. So no longer will you need to go clicking through a bunch of chat options just to find the emote you want. Instead, you can now click the middle mouse button or Shift+E to bring up the emote wheel. Here you can assign up to 40 different emotes and use each by clicking directly on the assigned button or hitting the number keys 1 through 8. To add emotes to the wheel, you need to go to the new Cosmetics Items tab in your spellbook, where you'll also now manage emotes, teleports, and victory dances. Here you can equip emotes to the wheel using the radial menu option at the bottom of the page, as well as equip victory dances with a different button. As an added bonus, you can equip up to 5 different victory dances and teleports at once, which will then be used randomly for some extra fun. Interestingly, there is an item limit of 100 emotes and 100 teleport effects, which I don't think you'll hit anytime soon, but it does make me wonder if there'll be a handy expand cosmetic item storage elixir available in the crown shop when that day does come. KI's gotta get that sweet crowns revenue wherever they can. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the emote wheel can be used during photomancy, which will make getting actually good-looking pictures of your characters a lot easier. As a content creator, you have no idea what a pain it has been to get clear pictures of various emotes for like thumbnails and stuff, because up until now I've had to like awkwardly click on the emote, then swing the camera around as quickly as possible to get footage of it. It's been super annoying, so I'm very happy with the change. Sticking with the theme of quality of life updates, there's a new feature called Recent Wizards, which are characters you've recently shared an activity with but aren't yet friends with. You'll see the Recent Wizards tab located under the social window in the upper right corner of your screen. Examples of activities that count for Recent Wizards include fighting in combat or entering a dungeon, hatching a pet, and playing Beast Moon, Derby, PvP, or a housing game. Basically, this allows you to connect with players when maybe you forgot to friend someone at the end of a dungeon and they left, or you otherwise need to get back in contact with someone, which is a super helpful feature. You can also send pixie posts to Recent Wizards and can chat or teleport to them if they're online from this page, as well as right-click to inspect them if you want to check their stats or what gear they have. There is a new setting to disable pixie post messages from Recent Wizards if you don't like it, however. Recent Wizards are sorted by the time you last did something with them, and using the sort button, you can filter them by activity. Honestly, this is just a nice quality of life update that makes connecting with people that much easier. Along with the recent Wizards tab, there have been some general social kiosk improvements to pay attention to. Adventure parties can now declare multiple purposes via a button in the social window in case you have multiple activities you're interested in. The purposes for parties are now shown in the social kiosk and you can sort them with a button. Guilds now also show what islands they have unlocked, and you can filter guilds by their unlocked islands via a sort button too. This allows players to choose between joining established guilds or wanting to start with a newer guild, or learn what types of activities they focus on based on the islands they've prioritized. In general, requesting to join a guild or adventure party has been cleaned up, so basically this is just another basic quality of life update. Okay, so if you watch my videos, you know that Archmastery has been a sore point for me for a long time, and I've been begging forever for KI to fix it. Well, the day has finally come, my fellow wizards. Archmastery has finally been changed for the better. For those of you that don't know, up until now, your Archmastery stat, which determines how likely you are to get a school pip each round, has been affected not only by your enemy's Archmastery stat, but also by your allies. So if your teammates have a higher Archmastery stat than you may not get a school pip on the first round and sometimes even subsequent rounds. And the bigger the difference between your Archmastery rating, the slower and slower you are able to get your school pips, with low levels sometimes unable to get a school pip at all with a higher level in the fight. This is obviously incredibly annoying and can ruin strategies for hitting when certain schools need school pips to cast AoEs like Rat Spin, Ship of Fools, or Deer Knight, and regularly affects high-level wizards from using their new Wallaroo AoE spells when there is even a small difference between teammates' Archmastery rating. Basically, up until now, players have often felt resentful of others who have a higher Archmastery rating because it makes them not able to use their own spells, which sucks from a gameplay and general enjoyment perspective. Thankfully, however, school pip generation is now determined only by comparing your Archmastery stat to your opponents, not your teammates. This is a much needed change, and I am so excited to finally be able to quest without worrying about other players hurting my ability to use my favorite spells. For Crown Shop updates, it looks like Arc 2 World Skip Elixirs have been added, as well as raid bundles and keys for all 3 raids, which are now in the new raid section of the Crown Shop. Basically, both these additions allow you to buy stuff if you don't want to grind out either questing or crafting. So never fear, folks, you can always just pull out your credit card and make your problems go away. Moving on, I have a bunch of miscellaneous changes that I think are worth taking a look at. There are new B paths for Bloodbat, Thundersnake, and Dark Sprite to check out. In addition, all stuns and damage AoEs have been changed to standard combat only and are no longer usable in advanced combat. I think the main spells newly affected by this are the Morganth Jewel AoEs, which may have gotten around the no AoE rule previously, so that has now been fixed. For guilds, there are now 1.5 hour versions of raid keys, which just gives people more options for raid lengths, and there are now gate keys, which you can use to access skeleton key bosses. Guild members will also notice a new achievement screen, which can be viewed at the NPC Llewellyn Prideheart near the guild tree of your guild house. For certain achievements, like when you tier a gallery in the guild museum or complete a raid, you'll now get an achievement along with the date and count for each. This is nothing crazy, but it is a nice way to celebrate milestones for guilds. Portal of Peril has been updated too, and while I couldn't get footage in Test Realm, there will now be a progress bar for fortune coins in the event, I assume on the Battle Pass, which was blank before. There are also 5 new gauntlets set to be added to the rotation, but it's not totally clear which ones those will be yet, but at least we don't have to do Sinbad for the zillionth time. It'll be interesting to see if the duplicate enemy bugs persist into the new gauntlets as well, but if you want to know more about Portal of Peril, I recommend checking out my other video on the topic. Other changes include Goldcap, the badge leaderboard NPC, being moved to Old Town for easier access. The Invite a Friend feature has been cleaned up and added to the Social tab. There are also new level 50 and 100 pins and pin gear, which have been added to Arc 1 and 2 alchemy stations in Dragonspire and Chrysalis. The level 50 pins and gear can be found at the crafting anvil at Dragon's Roost and offer various shield and sword options, which allow for more potential dual schooling. You'll use the Claw reagent to craft the pins and the regular level 50 gear to craft the alternative pin gear. The level 100 pins and gear, on the other hand, can be found in Sardonyx at Cilicia, the Snooping one. The pins require the Pollen Mote reagent to craft, and you can similarly craft the alternative level 100 gear with the standard gear pieces. For Beast Moon players, there are 3 new Beast Moon forms, including the Firewolf Warrior, Balanced Draconian, and Death Minotaur, as well as a new reward schedule for August through November 2024. Finally, it does look like official tournaments are returning. To register, you'll need the new reagent tourney tokens, which look like they'll drop from free-to-play sources like Scroll of Fortune and the PvP Battle Pass. And if you don't like PvP, you'll be able to exchange them for other rewards instead. Like, the test vendor currently has some emotes and teleports listed under Diego the Duel Master, so you might be able to exchange tourney tokens for stuff like that. For people who like the old Commander PvP robes, there appear to also be new updated texture versions which you can earn by taking part in tournaments. So what are my final thoughts on the update as a whole? Starting with the positive, it is good to see some solid quality of life updates like the Emote Wheel, recent Wizards tab, social kiosk improvements, and crucially, the desperately needed Archmastery fix we've all been waiting for. There does appear to kind of be some content for the average PvE players, with updates to gold key bosses and new lore spellments that you may want to farm for, although the new 170 gear and lore spells do primarily cater to advanced content and PvP players rather than PvE. In fact, if you consider the actual rewards alone, there doesn't appear to be a single content-based update here that is actually geared toward the average PvE player, which is a major bummer. If you actually look at all the major parts of this update, the raid, guild updates, boss rematches, and the gold key boss 170 drops, everything feels like it's almost exclusively for hardcore players and PvPers, which make up a very small percentage of the player base. To make the situation worse, a lot of the gear does not appear to be worth the effort to get it, since it's often barely a stat upgrade at all, so it'll be interesting to see if an even smaller percentage of players actually do the Polaris raid when it goes live compared to previous raids. To be clear, I don't think every aspect of every update needs to appeal to every part of the player base. There are pet collectors, housing decorators, stitchers, casual, average, and hardcore players all interested in different things. However, when more and more of the already limited updates seek to majorly cater to a fairly small percentage of the player base, and sometimes miss the mark, players begin to feel like those time and resources could have been better spent elsewhere. Resources could be better spent fixing major bugs and issues, with a recent example being the last major update, Portal of Peril, which is still bugged to hell with duplicate enemies, field level scaling, and players being pulled literally across the map. Obviously, every group should get catered to sometimes, and I'm not trying to discount the enjoyment of hardcore players, they matter too. But in my opinion, the portion of the devs' limited time and resources needs to be divided up a little more fairly than it has been recently. I would have loved to see people get a new raid, but also maybe like a new standard PvE-focused dungeon release this update too, rather than everything being so focused on only hardcore players. But hey, to be fair, maybe the lower difficulty for this raid and the addition of a standard version of the boss rematches was an attempt to make some advanced content more accessible to the average player and convince them to give it a try. But the general consensus I get from my viewers a lot of the time is that they're just really not interested in that type of content at all, so I'm not sure if trying to push the average player in that direction will pay off or not. This is obviously a controversial issue, so I hope down the line we can all come to some kind of fair compromise between hardcore and average to casual players, but I don't think we've quite hit the right balance yet. Let me know what you all think in the comments below. Do you like the update, or are you giving it a hard pass? And do you think this update caters too heavily to the hardcore minority of players? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Alright, my fellow wizards, those are all the major updates in the summer 2024 test realm. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, because it really does help me to make more amazing Wiz content for you all. And as always, I hope to see you out there in the spiral, and happy questing.